Welcome back to our Question Pro Fireside Chats. It's my absolute pleasure to be joined today by Ben Kelsey. He is the Senior Research and Innovation Consultant over at Cambridge Design Partnership. We'll be referring to them as CDP throughout this session, but it's a really fantastic firm. If you don't know about them, they're based up in Cambridge in the UK here in kind of the Research Triangle. And these guys are just absolutely whip smart at developing new products. Really kind of getting into these categories that you may think are really mature and figuring out ways to innovate. Things like beauty products with Avon or knife sets with Xylus. Really interesting case studies that we're going to jump into here. And one of the reasons why I've got Ben on the show is because they really take this kind of research first approach, right? How do you really innovate in these categories that are so mature? Well, it really comes down to research and understanding customers and understanding how they operate. And it's just been such a pleasure to meet Ben over the last 2 to 3 years and work together because, the way that they go about this and doing diary studies and really getting to the core of consumers is just so fascinating. So it's really going to be a great episode. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the show.
No, thank you. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And I know our audience is going to get so much out of this because I think this is something that we struggle with so much, right? How do you innovate in these product categories that are so mature? I think the way that CDP, Cambridge Design Partnership, goes about this is so interesting. But before we get there, Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself. What was kind of your journey to get to Cambridge Design Partnership?
Perfect. So, I guess not started off life, but my interest was always in people and human understanding. So when I finished high school and sixth form, I went in to do psychology. And so I came out of my psychology degree, and actually a lot of the people really found the dissertation and that side of things really hard. That was a bit I most enjoyed. So I wondered if that was something that I could do more often and do regularly as part of a job. So that really took me into insight and different understanding. So I worked for a couple of places. So originally I started off at a company called RDSI, who are now rebranded as Ninth Seat. But that was my first sort of foray into research and understanding that. And then I enjoy traveling, seeing people in different cultures. So I moved around a lot. So from London, I went to Sydney for a bit and worked for a company called Vivid, then back to the UK, and then back to RDSI, originally up in Leeds, then back to London. And then after that, I decided I wanted to see a bit more of the world. So I was working in Sri Lanka and Colombo for a little while. And then after that, I knew that I really enjoyed the research and the insight side of things. But the big challenge was I'd write these reports and provide all these insights. And it was great because you give people guidance, but you wouldn't know what happened from your initial research and your initial insight to seeing the product on the shelf or seeing the marketing campaign on TV. And you could put together the pieces towards what they took and what they didn't, but ultimately you didn't see that process. So I wondered if there was a way to get more involved in that and involved in the translation. And I was very fortunate to my parents live in Cambridge, so I ended up back in Cambridge. Fortunately got talking to the right people at the right time and started working at Cambridge Design Partnership. But the really nice thing about working here is that we can apply our insight skills, but we work with designers, engineers, manufacturing engineers, a wide range of different disciplines to translate the initial insight to bring those ideas to life. And you learn a lot in terms of the translation, the messaging through being involved in that. So that's a small part of what I do, what I have done and what I do at CDP.
Yeah, that's so interesting. This notion, I think a lot of insights professionals kind of face this, right? Is that, hey, you're at an agency, you're kind of on the outside. Even if you're at one of these companies, you're typically researching a pretty small portion of the real kind of product development life cycle, right? Okay, let's figure out some claim test, or maybe you're the researcher that just does the brand tracking and kind of, marketing taglines, aspects of things. But that's what's so fascinating about what you do at Cambridge Design Partnership. Like every time we talk, it's like, which part of the product design process are we in, right? Are we still kind of coming up with even sizing the market all the way down to hey, we've got first versions of the products. We're going to get them into diary studies and actually get them out there. And you get to see every single aspect and see these products come to life. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, first off, why does research even play a big role in product development cycles? How does it fit in at the end of the day?
So I think research is a very big sort of question. So there's the research I do, but there's also lots of different research that goes into any product. So it might be chemical research, understanding, okay, what could we do differently? What might be done differently? There's more the technical side of things to understand the substrates and how to change that type. There's the commercial and the review of that side of angle, because you can have a great product, but you got to understand how to get it to people, how to communicate, and how to sell it. So in terms of research broadly, there's lots of people doing research in different ways with their disciplines that ultimately I can understand the output. I can understand where we started off, but in terms of that middle bit in the process, I'll leave that to them and the various people that I work with. But critically, research is essential in any development. The research I do is basing on human needs. So essentially, it's a product that someone needs, or at least can enhance their life in some way. But the mission statement of Cambridge Design Partnership is to improve lives through innovation. So ultimately, that involves lots of research into understand the needs, but also how we put that together to answer upon the needs. Brilliant timing. And then essentially, we have to work together to be able to provide efficiencies to bring that product to market. Because ultimately, if you've got IP in a space and you're a client, you've only got a limited amount of time before that has to come to the market and before you start losing some of that time and some of the commercial opportunities that come with that. So really working together efficiently is the key, and that's a big part of what we do. To talk over this briefly, this is our model to innovation. So essentially it's called Potential Realized, but it's an end-to-end development process. And realistically, the company I work for, Cambridge Design Partnership, we can support people at various different stages of this journey. Where I tend to sit in is the more towards the early end. So I work in the front end development team. So that's very much opportunity definition.
Right.
So understanding what the needs are and how we begin to scope that into a concept. And then we flow through, and then I might come back in at between concept creation and realization to test some of the prototypes and ideas that we have. And then all the way through to product realization, you then have something that you can test back with the market to see if it delivers on some of the success factors that you have originally. And then obviously passing it on to manufacturing. And there is some research in lifecycle management, because inevitably, like with any product that's in the regulatory space, you need to collect information to show that it's doing what it's doing. But also there's a big need for post-market surveillance. So understanding, is it being used, if it's heavily regulated, is it being used in the way that you think it will be? And are people following those things? What does the launch look like? Are we expecting to see the things we expect to see? So as a researcher understanding individuals, I very much support throughout this process. But the main focus of my role here is in opportunity definition. Best way to look at this model through 0 through to 5 is almost like a constantly extending infinity loop, because sometimes you go all the way up, sometimes you go all the way back. And our role really is almost as a mentor, kind of a mentor or a coach, really, to connect people to get the information they need, so ultimately our clients can move to the next stage. And that broadly is the role we play and how we approach the various challenges we have at Cambridge Design Partnership.
Makes complete sense. I mean, it's a good kind of clarification, right? When you say the word research, because you're right. I mean, you sit with a whole bunch of engineers and chemists and people where we're like, I don't know how you're coming up, and that's like the true R&D side of things, right? Is the engineering piece, the chemicals piece, but a lot of times, I think we think about those things and we think those are really, really hard things because they are, right? Like we all don't understand, okay, how are you going to come up with a new chemical formulation or engineer a new product that you can physically use? But at the same time, the engineers and R&D technical people still need to know what they're building, right? And that's, I think, where you come in and where your teams come in, and this kind of opportunity definition stage is so important, right? Because as you said, you can go through this process, but if you're going down the wrong direction, all of those engineering resources, chemist resources, hardcore, expensive resources sitting in the lab are all getting wasted because they're going down the wrong definition. Is that kind of the wrong pathway? Is that kind of how you see your role in the firm?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the key things to state is that sometimes, for example, if a product's like ready, this existed for a long time, and that it's a case of, okay, how do we manufacture this to a different market, to a slightly different spec? There isn't always a need for, all the time, for me to be involved. But certainly when we start off and we have that research grounding and the human understanding to begin with, it best places us to guide the initial development, but also gives us a almost playbook to refer back to if there are challenges later on. And because I think we can all think about products that look amazing, they're designed brilliantly, but they don't function very well. And then equally products that function incredibly well, but don't look particularly good. So what we try to do is basically provide the insight and the inspiration and the resources so we can get to that bit in the middle of the Venn diagram between the ability to do what it needs to do, but also the design element. So it's as well designed for the purpose that it needs to be as possible, and hopefully it looks well doing it. So it's interesting you talk about that research at the front end, because it's good to have that idea and that grounding as you move forward, because you can have the idea, the benefit, what you need it to do, but you might get towards manufacture and actually making the product. And the big challenge that you have there is you come across something that you didn't anticipate, which means your fundamental design or something in your approach might need to change slightly. The nice thing with doing the research at the front end is you have that body of information, you have that playbook. So say it's an example that you have to make it slightly larger than it needs to be, or one of the features isn't possible with another one. You should have the reference point to understand where the priority is to inform that decision making. And as we talked about to the previous question, that allows you to make design decisions a little bit quicker and hopefully minimizes the time it takes to get a successful product to market.
Got it. That makes complete sense. So walk us through maybe a little bit of an example, if you can share one, of kind of how that process works, right? So you kind of mentioned, okay, this product is maybe too small or too big. So then are you kind of resting on all of the research that you did in the first stage to kind of say, you know what, only this percentage of the market would have that size of a hand, so maybe it's a lower priority? Is that kind of the way that it would work? Is that a good example to kind of think about?
Yeah, so a good example is it's on the website. So when we were making one of the ice cream machines, there was some technical standpoints that were more challenging to make in reality than they were on paper, which was fine. But then when we got to making it, those things got thrown up and we were talking about it, and we were able to say, okay, look, this is the priority you can give to these, because when we talked to them about customers and consumers, they didn't need it to do things at that regularity, at that speed, at that quickness. So that allowed us to be able to say, okay, this is your priority. This is what you need to make sure happens. These can be lower down. And then that allowed them to make decisions quite quickly in the design process, which ultimately allowed us to make the final product a little bit quicker.
Wow. Well, I know there'd be a lot of product managers even at Question Pro, and I'm sure on this stream that would love to have all of that data as they think about prioritizing this stuff, right? I mean, this is just the constant challenge in any product manager's kind of playbook, right? Is how do I prioritize? What are the things that are important? Like, no matter what product development cycle you're working on, there's always going to be unexpected things that come up. And those are the real challenging times where you now have to know, like, how do we prioritize this? What's the data telling us? most of the time you don't have the data. In your case, you've actually got something that can point them in the right direction.
And yeah, it's a big challenge for us sometimes to be able to communicate that. You only realize the benefit or the potential benefits really obvious when you get to that stage and you don't have it. And it's like, oh, we wish we had this. And it's not the case that we always do have that level of information. Some of the projects and some of the work we do is when challenges come up, we can review some of the data that exists either in the market that's available publicly, or certainly if our client, in whatever instance it may be, has a backlog of existing insight reports. We go through those with a different lens to be able to try and get the information to inform how that might fit in the design process. There's a lag in doing that, but there are other ways to get to it.
Right.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, obviously, you're preaching to the converted, but my advice would very much be to take a little bit of extra time and make sure you have that foundation of research evidence and insight and guidance before you start developing the product, the technical specs, and hopefully that will give you efficiency to bring something that is functionally as well as it designs as well as it could be, aesthetically designed as well as it could be, and ultimately gets to market as quickly as it could be. Your best place for success.
Makes sense. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Those who are just joining us live, I'm chatting with Ben Kelsey here from Cambridge Design Partnership, and we're really diving deep on where kind of the insights profession and market research really kind of plays a role in product development, in product innovation. Ben, let's dive in a little bit into kind of how these studies actually work, right? So we're trying to gather all this data before we actually go into the product development, the R&D process. What do those studies look like? How do you approach things? Is it a qualitative study, a quantitative study? How do you go about what seems like a pretty wide and open brief part a lot of the times?
So I think realistically, the research approach is very much a very small cog in the big wheel of potential realized and the big wheel of what CDP do. So each innovation product is slightly different. For example, we might be working in a completely novel space where we really don't have anything to go by, and we have to run lots of small agile research projects to slowly give us the direction. On the other side of things, you might be working in a market that traditionally, or a category that traditionally is quite saturated, which is great on the other side of things because you've got lots of information. There's lots of information online. There's lots of things that you can read to quite quickly give you insight and direction and kind of provide the guardrails for you to start narrowing down and build opportunity platforms on top. So there's no one-stop shop or no best place sort of methodology that can do it. You mentioned up front the qualitative and quantitative angle. The best approach is to have a balance of both. Obviously, in a saturated market, you can gain a lot of your big insights through some very good desk research. But you might miss some of the nuances, some of the granularity. So it could be something as simple as a behavior that everyone's doing that you see, or by doing in-home interviews, you pick up attention or something that people are finding difficult that you can design around. So an interesting example for that is the Xylus Knife study. So this was running and finishing towards the start of my time at Cambridge Design Partnership. So I'm very much talking in the third person. The key thing with that was the researchers and my colleagues now went into people's homes, both in the UK and the US, and basically looked at how they stored knives, how they collected them, what the types of things they were chopping up with them, how they were using different knife configurations, how they were using them on the chopping boards, and through that tried to understand a long list of things that people were trying to achieve. And that allowed us to go to a quantitative survey and run some jobs to be done analysis that allowed us to understand, of the knives that are available on the market, which the needs that are unmet. So through that list, we were then able to say, okay, this is the thing we need to design for to provide a different knife that can help people to chop up, prepare food in the new generally in the market. And then these were the things that our designers worked design around. We then tested those products back when we had them made and made some final tweaks, and then that was a product that ended up on the market. So that broadly is an example of a process that we went through. But had it been a different market where there was lots of information, different category where there was lots of information online, or had there been lots of research done already, that would have changed our approach slightly and how we would have got some of the insights to start building the design on top of.
Interesting. That's such a good example. I mean, I think it really does, in some ways, bring this kind of process to life, right? That this is just a constant kind of iterative process at every single stage. And you can almost kind of look at these infinity loops as like qual and quant as well, right? I mean, I think that's something that I notice a lot when we work together is like, it's this constant open exploration through qual. You kind of go into the house, you see how people are using knives, and then you come back out and validate it through quant, right? And then you say, okay, now we've kind of validated there might be a concept here. We do a little bit of product development, see how that's used in a qual way, and then maybe go out for a bigger study in a quant way to kind of validate that we've got the right solution. Is that kind of how this innovation process works?
Yes, certainly. And another nice example that we have is from some work that we completed for the Foundation for the Smokefree World, and there's a white paper on our website for anyone that wants to read that in detail. But for the knives, this is very much using a product to satisfy a need, which is ultimately chopping up and preparing food. But for Foundation for the Smoke-Free World, we were trying to understand what are the impediments and barriers to stopping smoking in the developing world, so low and middle income countries. And for that, it was very much trying to understand the needs that smoking provides for. So what are the reasons that people smoke? What are the things that it satisfies in their life that means that they keep doing it? So for that, we run qualitative interviews to understand those needs. But you could have done those online, you could have done them on the phone. But one of the key things that you get through being in the environment is the seeing and feeling what it's like for them. And ultimately that's as fun as it's study at the moment. That's not you don't get that when you speak to someone in 2D or on the phone. So that's the big challenge. But then the second stage of the process for the Foundation of the Smoke-Free World was similar to the knife study. We created a long list of jobs to be done, and that allowed us to segment the market on the different needs that are available. So what are the clustered needs that smokers tend to use cigarettes to satisfy? And therefore, that allowed us to understand, okay, these are the needs that you need to satisfy with another solution for these people to consider stopping smoking. So it's evidence-driven, it's human insight-based, but the consistency between all of the projects that we do is trying to look at things in a different way, leveraging the different technology, the different skill sets that we have in-house to come up with a different way of thinking and a different solution. And it's great fun. And I get to work with some very interesting people day to day. There isn't a one-stop shop. So we have our model, which allows us to roughly ground our thinking, but it's very much a case of that gives us a foundation that we build upon, and we build upon depending on the context and the challenge that we have to meet.
Yeah, it makes total sense. You know, I think a lot of times you kind of hear that adage, right? Like Henry Ford, right? Hey, if I went and asked everybody what they want, they'd say they wanted a faster horse, right? Not a car. And I think a lot of people. Use that as kind of a way to say, oh, well, we shouldn't really, use market research to come up with what the product is going to be. But I think your example is perfect because, what you said is we got to go into the home. We got to see them in person using those knives. They're not going to tell us how they want that knife to improve. But if we observe them, we can come up with some ideas and then validate that through quant research to say, hey, are these actually the jobs that need to be done that are important for a big enough market to create a new product?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's two levels to that. I think the Henry Ford statement's an interesting one, and it's often a soft stick that we get beaten with. But that's fair enough. People said if I'd have asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse.
Right.
But actually, what does that mean? And if you extract that, that actually means it would be nice to get to the shops or the cobblers or wherever people tended to go when they had horses, but they wanted to get there a little bit quicker. So that was actually what they needed and what they meant. The only way that they could think to get there was basically making their horse faster.
Right.
But the reality, if you take that insight and that need and talk to the people that know a different way of executing it, so if you talk to engineers, they would have the idea of something like the car or using a greyhound, but there are different solutions to satisfy that need, and they would be the ones to answer it. And then I think there's also a nuance between qualitative and quantitative. It's what you get out of it. I listened back to your call with, I think the first one of these that you did with Daniel, and you were talking about the different maybe types of people you get on quantitative research. Interestingly, on qualitative research, we often try and talk to a diverse range of people, but they need to be willing to invite us into our homes to allow us to do what we do. And straight away, there are some guardrails you're putting on your potential audience by doing that. So it gives you the insight, but that doesn't necessarily give you access to the whole population. The beauty with quantitative research is you get to that scale. So is it something that one person said with emotion and vigor that we really dialed into that actually doesn't dial up? Or is it something that's reflective of the market as a whole? And that really gives you the best indication that what you're developing into will be commercially successful and is something ultimately you can build a proposition, a product, a concept around.
Right. Yeah. Because that's where you have to validate from a quant perspective. Is there a real market here? Is this actually, hitting enough people? And I think you're absolutely right. Anytime you do a qual project, by nature, especially if it's in person, it's going to be somewhat biased. And so it's kind of that 1-2 punch, right? The partners in crime, the qual, and then validating with the quant in order to make sure that there's a big enough market and that what we see is actually validated across a larger population.
Yeah. And thank you very much for your help doing that. I could do that without question.
Well, we hope to help on the, especially kind of get the agile stuff done, and we're moving more and more into qual, but it's been such a pleasure working with you and seeing kind of how this process works. There's one thing that you said a little bit that I want to just rewind before we kind of jump off the call, because I see this challenge a lot with researchers. You kind of mentioned, when you start the process, do we go out with kind of an agile approach, lots of small studies that we can kind of iterate on? Or do we go out with a big study that we really kind of understand the entire market, the entire population, and now we've got kind of a big report to come back to through the product development cycle? I think lots of researchers are facing this problem these days, right? Yeah. Do I make this into small agile studies, or do I kind of go and commission a large study? Like, walk us through your process. How do you decide which is the right route, right path to go down?
I think, it's a big question, but ultimately I think it's a question of confidence. And then there are lots of other factors that go into that: timelines, budget, requirements, needs. And it might be that if we don't do something now, we won't have the opportunity again. So therefore, even without the guardrails, you've got to go big straight away. But I often view it as the only analogy I can give, probably with 1 minute left, is it's a bit like, how explorative are you being? So how confident can you commit to this? If you think about like pioneers, people that are exploring, like someone goes up Everest or goes to the case of altitude training, you go, you push it a little bit, you come back down, you review, then you go again, and you come back down, you review again. So I think that is the context that you're working with, but ultimately, like that agile approach of going, reviewing, and then seeing, that allows you a point to pivot. And then you can say, actually, now we're looking at a market which there's some tangible evidence for. So that allows you to do some desk research. You can go online. There are different ways to achieve it. Whereas if you go straight for the summit, you'll get speed, but there might be opportunities and different things you miss upon the way. But it is heavily context driven, heavily context based. And yeah, if you give me an example, I can probably give you a full approach. But without
I think it's a great metaphor, right? Because it does come down to how confident are you in the market? How much time have you already spent here, right? I mean, in your metaphor, if you live on the mountain and you climb up to the top every single day, you're steeped in this mountain, you know everything about it already. Yeah, you probably don't need to go up and down, right? You can head to the top, You're already kind of acclimatized and ready to go, and you can go for the big punch. But if you're kind of still learning, you're still kind of entering into this market, trying to figure out the product space, maybe it's a new space in general, then that more iterative approach kind of makes the most sense.
Yeah, and building on that, like we are, my company or Cambridge Design Partnership, we're very much the Sherpas in that analogy that I came up with. But our role is we need to try and get you or the people we work with to the summit or as far as you can go. We need to work with you to what you're comfortable with, what capabilities you have, what tech you have with, make sure you have all the equipment to ensure that you can get there. But ultimately, we are the coach. We're helping, we're connecting with the right people at the right time.
I love it. We brought the mountain metaphor full circle.
Yeah, there you go.
Very nice. Well, Ben, I think that's an amazing way to close the show. Thank you so much for coming on and giving us some insight into how market research plays a role in kind of the product development process. I think that this notion of the agile approach, the iterative approach, right, I think really makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. And it's just been such a pleasure working with Cambridge Design. This is a picture of their new office in Cambridge. If anybody has a chance to get out there, do check out Cambridge Design's website. These guys are super sharp, and now they've got some amazing digs to hang out with. I can't always promise the blue skies that you see in this picture, but you might get lucky out there in Cambridge.
Yeah. We don't get a lot of rain in Cambridge, but we don't get a lot of sun either. So try your chances.
Better than rain all day. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. To the audience out there, thank you so much for joining us for another Fireside Chat. We'll be back in 2 weeks on the 14th of April. This time we're heading back down to South Africa. We'll actually have Sean Naidu, who's the chairman of the South African Market Research Association, joining us to talk about what's going on in the market research space down there and how SAMR is kind of building a new approach to education for insights professionals everywhere. So once again, thanks for joining the show. Ben, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.